The coffee shop buzzed with the usual morning crowd when Jessica Martinez walked in, wearing a desert camouflage jacket that had seen better days. She kept her head down, avoiding eye contact as she approached the counter. The barista, a college student with purple hair and multiple piercings, barely looked up from her phone. "What can I get you?" Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. "Black coffee, large," Jessica replied quietly, her voice carrying a slight rasp that spoke of too many cigarettes and not enough sleep. Behind her, a group of men in their 30s occupied a corner table, their conversation growing louder with each passing minute. They wore matching black t-shirts with American flag patches and military-style haircuts that screamed veteran status to anyone paying attention. "I'm telling you, the stolen valor problem is getting out of control," one of them said, his voice carrying across the small space. "Just last week, some woman at the VA claimed she served in Afghanistan. Turned out she was a secretary at some supply depot in Kentucky." His companions nodded knowingly. These were the self-appointed guardians of military honor, the type who spent their free time hunting down fake veterans on social media and exposing them in viral videos that destroyed lives and careers. Jessica's hand tightened around her wallet as she waited for her coffee. She'd heard this conversation before, in different places with different people, but the sentiment was always the same. The assumption that combat veterans looked a certain way, acted a certain way, and that anyone who didn't fit the mold was probably lying. "The worst part," another man continued, "is when they claim combat experience. Like that woman who spoke at the Memorial Day ceremony last month. Something about her story didn't add up." Jessica's coffee arrived, and she turned to leave, but the conversation followed her. "Sarah Chun, that was her name," the first man said. "Claimed she was a helicopter pilot in Iraq. But my buddy looked into it, and there's no record of any Sarah Chun flying combat missions." The mention of that name made Jessica stop. Sarah Chun had been her friend, her roommate at Fort Campbell, and one of the bravest people she'd ever known. Sarah had died in a helicopter crash outside Fallujah in 2008, and Jessica had been there when they brought her body home. "You're wrong," Jessica said quietly, not turning around. The conversation at the corner table stopped. The coffee shop seemed to grow quieter, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. "Excuse me?" the first man said, his voice taking on an edge. Jessica turned slowly, her dark eyes meeting his. "Sarah Chun. She was a Black Hawk pilot with the 101st Airborne. She died in 2008 when her helicopter went down during a rescue mission near Fallujah. She saved 14 people that day." The man's face flushed red. "And how would you know that?" "Because I was there." The simple statement hung in the air like a challenge. The man stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. He was tall, well-built, with the kind of confidence that came from never having. His authority questioned. "Really? And what unit were you with?" Jessica set her coffee down on the nearest table. 82nd Airborne, 2nd Battalion, 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment. "Uh-huh." The man's smile was cold. "And I suppose you saw combat?" 2, 3 tours. Iraq and Afghanistan." The man's companions had stood up now, forming a loose semicircle around Jessica. Other customers in the coffee shop had stopped their conversations, sensing the tension building in the small space. "Funny thing about stolen valor," the man said, pulling out his phone. "It's really easy to check these days. What's your name, sweetheart?" The condescension in his voice was like a slap. Jessica had heard that tone before, from drill sergeants who thought women didn't belong in the infantry, from officers who questioned her presence in combat zones, from politicians who preferred their female veterans to be pretty and compliant, rather than scarred and honest. "Jessica Martinez." "Jessica Martinez," the man repeated, typing into his phone. Let's see what we can find. The coffee shop had gone completely silent now. Even the barista had stopped pretending to work, her eyes fixed on the confrontation unfolding in front of her. Interesting, the man said after a few minutes. I'm not finding any Jessica Martinez in the 82nd Airborne during the time frame you mentioned. That's because my records are classified, Jessica said evenly. The man laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the coffee shop walls. Oh, that's rich. Let me guess, you were Special Forces too. Maybe the CIA? Or are you going to tell US you're a Navy SEAL? His companions joined in the laughter, and soon half the coffee shop was watching what they assumed was the public humiliation of another stolen valor case. Jessica stood perfectly still, her hands at her sides, her breathing slow and controlled. You know what I think? The man continued, emboldened by the audience. I think you're a fraud. I think you put on that jacket to get free coffee and discounts, and thank you for your service. Handshakes from people who actually respect the military. I think, one of his friends added, you should take off that jacket before someone calls the police. Jessica looked around the coffee shop, taking in the faces of the people watching her. Some looked sympathetic, others skeptical, but most just seemed uncomfortable with the confrontation playing out in front of them. I earned this jacket, she said quietly. Prove it, the first man challenged. Show us your DD-214. Show us your deployment orders. Show us anything that proves you're not just another fake trying to steal honor from people who actually served. Jessica reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a wallet, worn leather that had seen better days. She opened it slowly, revealing a military identification card that she placed on the table next to her coffee. The man picked it up, studied it for a moment, then shook his head. This doesn't prove anything. You could have gotten this from a pawn shop. Or stolen it from a real veteran, his friend added. The accusation hit Jessica like a physical blow. She'd heard whispers like this before, seen the way some people looked at her when she attended veteran events or used her benefits at the VA hospital. The assumption that because she didn't look like their idea of a combat veteran, she must be lying. I buried 17 of my brothers and sisters in arms, Jessica said, her voice barely above a whisper. I held Sarah Chun's hand when she died. In that helicopter. I watched good people die for bad reasons, and bad people profit from their sacrifice. Great story, the man said dismissively. But stories are all you have, aren't they? No proof, no documentation, just stories about classified missions and dead heroes who can't contradict you. The coffee shop had become a courtroom, and Jessica was on trial for the crime of not looking like what these men thought a war hero should look like. She was too small, too quiet, too damaged by experiences that had left scars on her soul, rather than her body. You want proof? Jessica asked, her voice gaining strength. I want you to stop disrespecting the uniform and the people who actually wore it in combat. Jessica looked at the man for a long moment, seeing in his face the same certainty that had gotten so many people killed in the wars she'd fought. The absolute conviction that came from never having your assumptions challenged by reality. Some proof, she said slowly, can't be faked. She reached for the sleeve of her jacket, and for the first time since the confrontation began, something in her eyes made the man take a step back, because sometimes the truth doesn't announce itself with fanfare or documentation. Sometimes it's written in scars and ink, in the language of sacrifice that only those who've paid the price can truly understand. And sometimes, the quiet woman in the corner is exactly who she says she is, even when that truth is more terrible and more beautiful than anyone wants to believe. Jessica rolled up her right sleeve with deliberate slowness, revealing an arm that told a story no faker could replicate. The skin bore the telltale marks of shrapnel wounds, small pockmarks, and scars that formed a constellation of violence across her forearm. But it was the tattoo that made the lead accuser's confident expression falter for just a moment. Inked in black and red, A paratrooper's wings spread across her inner forearm, but not the standard military design most people recognized. This was different, older, more detailed, with a script underneath that read "Death from Above" in letters that had been touched up multiple times over the years. "Nice tattoo," the man said, recovering his composure. "You can get those done at any shop in town. Hell, my nephew has one just like it, and he's never been outside of Ohio." His friends laughed, but the sound was forced now, lacking the easy confidence from before. Something about the way Jessica carried herself had changed when she revealed. Her arm, the quiet submission, was gone, replaced by something harder, more dangerous. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Your nephew," Jessica said, her voice taking on a different quality, "probably doesn't have this." She pushed up her left sleeve, revealing another tattoo that made the coffee shop fall completely silent. It was a detailed map of a compound, inked in precise lines that showed buildings, guard towers, and entrance points. Numbers and symbols marked various locations, and at the bottom, a date, March 15th, 2009. What the hell is that supposed to be? The lead accuser demanded, but his voice had lost some of its edge. "Mission map," Jessica said simply. "Compound Bravo 7, 12 clicks north of Kandahar. We went in at 0300 hours to extract a captured intelligence officer. The map was classified, so I had it tattooed on my arm where I could reference it without carrying compromising documents." The man stared at the tattoo, his phone forgotten, in his hand. The level of detail was extraordinary, not the kind of thing someone would get done for show. Every line served a purpose, every mark had meaning. "Anyone can make up a story about a tattoo," he said, but doubt had crept into his voice. "The guard towers," Jessica continued, pointing to specific marks on her arm, "were manned by Taliban fighters with AK-47s and RPGs. The main building had reinforced walls, so we had to breach through the roof. The prisoner was being held in the basement, which you can see marked here." She traced the lines with her finger, explaining tactical details that no civilian would know, using military terminology with the casual precision of someone who had lived it. "The extraction went bad," she continued. "Intel was wrong about the number of hostiles. What was supposed to be a quick in and out became a 3-hour firefight. We lost 2 good men getting out of there." The coffee shop had become a theater, and everyone was watching Jessica's one-woman show. But this wasn't performance, it was confession. The kind of raw honesty that came from someone who had carried secrets for too long. "The officer we extracted," she said, her voice growing quieter, "had been tortured for 6 days. His name was Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb, and he's still serving at the Pentagon. You can look him up if you want. He might even remember the woman who helped carry him out of that compound." The lead accuser was typing furiously on his phone now, his earlier confidence replaced by something that looked suspiciously like panic. His investigation was taking an unexpected turn. "Even if that's true," he said, not looking up from his screen, "it doesn't prove you were there. You could have heard the story from someone who was actually involved." Jessica smiled for the first time since the confrontation began, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. It was the smile of someone who had been underestimated so many times that the experience had become almost amusing. "You're right," she said. "Stories can be stolen, but some things can't be faked." She reached into her jacket and pulled out a small device that looked like a modified smartphone. The screen was cracked, and the casing showed signs of significant wear and damage. "GPS tracker," she explained. "Military issue, encrypted. We use these to coordinate movement and mark target locations during operations." She powered up the device, and after a few seconds, a map appeared on the screen. It showed terrain features, elevation markers, and a series of red dots that formed a pattern across what appeared to be mountainous territory. Each dot represents a confirmed kill, Jessica said matter-of-factly. Sniper shots, confirmed by spotters and recorded by command. The device tracks location, time, distance, and atmospheric conditions for each engagement. The coffee shop had gone so quiet that the sound of the espresso machine seemed deafening. Several customers had moved closer, trying to get a better look at the device in Jessica's hands. 97 confirmed kills, she continued, scrolling through data that appeared to be authentic military records. Over 3 tours of duty. The longest shot was 1,247 meters in the mountains of Afghanistan. The target was a Taliban commander who had been coordinating attacks on supply convoys. The lead accuser's phone fell silent. He wasn't typing anymore, wasn't making jokes, wasn't looking up military records. He was staring at Jessica with the growing realization that he had made a catastrophic error in judgment. "This is impossible," he whispered. "Why?" Jessica asked. "Because I'm a woman? Because I don't look like your idea of a sniper? Because I'm not 6 feet tall with a shaved head and a chest full of medals?" She put the GPS device away and pulled out another item, a small notebook with a weathered cover. The pages were filled with handwritten entries in precise military-style notation. "Kill the book," she explained. "Every sniper keeps one. Date, time, location, target description, environmental conditions, and confirmation details. It's not just about the numbers, it's about accountability. Every shot fired, every life taken, gets recorded and remembered." She opened the notebook to a random page and began reading aloud. September 23, 2008. Grid coordinates: 3432 Sventin N69, 845, E. Target: Taliban sniper. Approximately 800 meters, elevated position in building rubble. Wind speed 8 miles per hour from the northwest. Temperature 89 degrees Fahrenheit. One shot, center mass, confirmed by Sergeant David Patterson, spotter. Target eliminated, threat neutralized, convoy able to continue movement. The clinical precision of the entry was more convincing than any dramatic story could have been. This was the language of a professional warrior, someone who approached violence with the methodical care of a surgeon. "Every entry in this book," Jessica said, closing the notebook, "represents a moment when someone's life ended because of a decision I made. Every page is a weight I carry, a name I remember, a face that visits me in my dreams." The lead accuser had gone pale. His friends had stepped back, no longer eager to be associated with what was clearly becoming a public humiliation. Other customers in the coffee shop were pulling out their phones, some to record the confrontation, others to search for information about Jessica Martinez. "I don't understand," the man said weakly. "Your records ... they're not in the system." "Black operations," Jessica explained patiently. "Classified missions that officially never happened. The kind of work that requires your military records to be sealed, your identity to be scrubbed from databases, your very existence to become a matter of national security." She reached into her wallet again and pulled out a business card that looked like it had been printed on government equipment. The text was minimal. "Dr. Patricia Hendricks, Veterans Affairs Psychiatric Services, Specialized Trauma Unit." "My therapist," Jessica said, handing the card to the man. "She specializes in treating veterans of classified operations. Call her if you want confirmation that I'm not lying about my service. She won't be able to tell you details, but she can confirm that I'm a legitimate patient being treated for combat-related PTSD." The man took the card while shaking hands. His entire worldview was crumbling around him, built as it was on the assumption that he could spot a fake veteran from across a room. "But why?" he asked desperately. "Why would the military hide your records? What's the point of classified service if you can't prove it?" Jessica looked at him with something approaching pity. "Because some missions are so sensitive that acknowledging They happened would create international incidents. Because some operations are so classified that the families of Kia soldiers are told their loved ones died in training accidents rather than combat. Because some wars are fought in places that don't appear on any map, against enemies that officially don't exist. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the coffee shop. I spent 7 years of my life fighting America's secret wars. I killed people whose names I'll never know in countries I can't mention, for reasons that were explained to me by officers who probably didn't understand them either. And when it was over, when I'd given everything I had to give, the military made me disappear. The silence in the coffee shop was profound. Even the background music seemed to have stopped. Jessica stood in the center of it all, a small woman who had just revealed herself to be something far more dangerous and complex than anyone had imagined. So when you see a woman like me, she continued, her voice gaining strength, and your first instinct is to assume she's lying about her service, maybe ask yourself why that is. Maybe consider that your assumptions about what a warrior looks like might be wrong. Maybe remember that the most dangerous people are often the ones who look like they couldn't hurt a fly. The lead accuser was staring at his phone again, but this time he wasn't looking up military records. He was reading news articles, searching for any mention of classified operations, trying to find some corner of the internet that would validate his worldview and prove that Jessica was still lying. But the internet, for once, had no answers. The wars Jessica had fought were too secret, too classified, too dangerous to be documented in any database he could access. "I'm sorry," he said finally, the words barely audible. Jessica looked at him for a long moment, studying his face with the same intensity she had once used to acquire targets through a rifle scope. "No," she said quietly. "You're not sorry. You're confused. You're embarrassed. You're scared that you've been wrong about something you thought you understood completely. But you're not sorry, because being sorry would require you to understand what you've done wrong." She began rolling her sleeves back down, covering the tattoos and scars that had told her story more effectively than any documentation could have. Being sorry would mean acknowledging that you've spent your time attacking people who served their country in ways you can't imagine. Being sorry would mean admitting that your little stolen valor crusade has probably destroyed the lives of legitimate veterans whose service was too classified to prove. The man opened his mouth to protest, but Jessica held up a hand to stop him. "Save it," she said. "I've heard every excuse, every justification, every rationalization. The truth is, you enjoyed the power that came from exposing fake veterans. You liked being the arbiter of military authenticity. You got a rush from humiliating people in public." She picked up her coffee and took a sip, grimacing slightly at the taste that had gone cold during the confrontation. "The problem is," she continued, "you never considered the possibility that you might be wrong. You never thought about what happens when you attack someone whose service was real but unprovable. You never imagined that some of us are invisible by design, not by choice." The weight of her words settled over the coffee shop like a blanket. Several customers had tears in their eyes. Others were staring at Jessica with a mixture of awe and horror, trying to reconcile the quiet woman they had initially ignored with the warrior she had revealed herself to be. But Jessica wasn't finished. She had spent years carrying the burden of invisible service, of unacknowledged sacrifice, of being dismissed and doubted by people who had never faced the choices she had been forced to make. And now, finally, she had found her voice. Jessica set her coffee cup down and looked around the coffee shop one final time. The faces staring back at her showed a mixture of curiosity, sympathy, and lingering doubt. She understood their hesitation. Everything she had shown them could be explained away by someone determined to believe she was lying. Tattoos could be copied, equipment could be purchased, documentation could be forged. But there was one piece of evidence that couldn't be faked: couldn't be stolen, and couldn't be dismissed by even the most skeptical observer. "You want absolute proof?" she asked, directing her question to the lead accuser, who was still clutching his phone like a lifeline. "Something that can't be explained away or rationalized or dismissed as coincidence." The man nodded weakly, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. His friends had distanced themselves from him both physically and emotionally, sensing that their impromptu stolen valor investigation had gone catastrophically wrong. Jessica reached for the collar of her jacket and began unbuttoning it slowly. Underneath, she wore a simple black t-shirt that revealed more of the scarred landscape of her arms and shoulders. But it wasn't the scars that made several people in the coffee shop gasp audibly. It was the tattoo that covered her entire left shoulder blade. The design was unlike anything most people had ever seen. It wasn't the standard military imagery of eagles and flags and motivational slogans. Instead, it was a complex geometric pattern that seemed to shift and change depending on the angle from which it was viewed. Lines intersected and separated in ways that hurt to look at directly, forming shapes that suggested maps, blueprints, and mathematical equations all at once. "Temporal coordinates," Jessica said simply, noticing the confusion on the faces around her. "Classified military technology that allows for precise timing of operations across multiple time zones and geographic locations." She traced one of the lines with her finger, following a pattern that seemed to spiral inward toward a central point, marked with symbols that looked almost alien in their complexity. "The tattoo contains the mathematical formulas for calculating optimal strike windows, accounting for satellite positioning, enemy movement patterns, and weather conditions up to 72 hours in advance." The coffee shop had gone beyond quiet into something approaching reverence. People were leaning forward, trying to make sense of the intricate design that covered Jessica's shoulder. Several customers were taking pictures, though the images would never capture the full complexity of what they were seeing. "This particular operation," Jessica continued, pointing to a specific section of the tattoo, "was planned for 8 months before execution. The target was a weapons facility in a location I can't name, operated by an organization that officially doesn't exist." She moved her finger to another part of the design, where the lines formed what looked like a countdown timer frozen at 0. "The mission required split-second timing. We had a 37-second window when satellite coverage would create a blind spot in enemy surveillance. 37 seconds to breach the facility, eliminate the targets, secure the intelligence, and exfiltrate without leaving any evidence of American involvement." The lead accuser was staring at the tattoo with an expression that had moved beyond skepticism into something approaching horror. He was beginning to understand that he had picked a fight with someone whose very existence challenged everything he thought he knew about military service. "The formulas tattooed on my shoulder," Jessica said, "were developed by a team of mathematicians and physicists working for a division of the Pentagon that has no official name and no public budget. The entire program was so classified that only 12 people in the world knew it existed." She paused, letting the weight of that statement settle over her audience. "I was one of the 12. A woman near the back of the coffee shop raised her hand tentatively, as if she were in a classroom rather than witnessing a public confrontation. "How do we know that's real?" she asked. "I mean, it looks impressive, but couldn't someone just make up mathematical formulas and claim they're classified?" Jessica smiled, and for the first time since the confrontation began, it seemed genuine rather than bitter. "Good question," she said, "and you're right to be skeptical. Anyone can tattoo random equations on their body and claim they're classified military secrets." She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small device that looked like a combination smartphone and calculator. The screen was larger than a normal phone, and the interface appeared to be designed for complex mathematical computations. "This is a field computation device," she explained, powering on the equipment. It's loaded with the same algorithms that are tattooed on my shoulder, but in digital form that can be updated as needed. She began entering data into the device, reading numbers from specific sections of her tattoo. The process was complex, involving multiple calculations and cross-references that clearly required extensive training to execute properly. The device is synchronized with current satellite positioning systems, she said while working. It can calculate optimal timing windows for operations anywhere in the world, accounting for real-time variables that affect mission success. The screen on the device began displaying what appeared to be a countdown timer, along with geographic coordinates and atmospheric data that was updating in real time. According to the calculations, Jessica said, the optimal window for a hypothetical operation at the coordinates of this coffee shop would be in approximately 6 hours and 14 minutes, lasting for 42 seconds. She showed the screen to the people nearest her, revealing data that was clearly being generated by sophisticated software rather than simple pre-programmed responses. The level of precision required for these calculations, she continued, is beyond what any civilian organization could develop or maintain. The algorithms account for classified information about satellite orbits, military communication schedules, and intelligence gathering protocols that are updated constantly based on global security conditions. The lead accuser was staring at the device with an expression of growing panic. His entire investigation had been based on the assumption that fake veterans couldn't provide convincing proof of their service. But Jessica wasn't just providing proof. She was demonstrating capabilities that exceeded anything he had imagined possible. Even if that's all real, he said desperately. How do we know you didn't steal it from someone who actually served? How do we know you're not just claiming credit for someone else's achievements? Jessica looked at him with the patience of someone who had anticipated every possible objection. Because, she said quietly, the tattoo isn't just a mathematical formula. It's also a unique identifier. She pointed to a small section of the design near her collarbone, where the lines formed what looked like a barcode made of intricate geometric patterns. Biometric authentication, she explained. The pattern is based on my DNA sequence, my fingerprints, and retinal scan data. It's mathematically impossible to replicate unless you have access to my complete biological profile. She held up the computation device again and activated what appeared to be a scanning function. A thin beam of light emerged from the device and swept across the tattoo on her shoulder. The device can authenticate the tattoo in real time, she said as the screen displayed a series of confirmations. It's reading the biometric data encoded in the pattern and verifying it against stored records. The screen flashed green, displaying a message that read, Authentication confirmed, operator designation, GHOST-7 clearance level, Omega Black. The coffee shop erupted in whispers and murmured conversations as people tried to process what they had just witnessed. Several customers were frantically searching their phones for information about military clearance levels and classified operations. Ghost 7? Someone asked from the crowd. Operational call sign, Jessica replied matter-of-factly. Each member of the program was assigned a number based on mission completion records and success rates. I was the 7th operator recruited into the program at Omega Black clearance. Jessica's expression grew more serious. The highest level of classification in the American military. Above top secret, above cosmic, above anything that has ever been publicly acknowledged. She began buttoning her jacket back up, covering the tattoo that had provided more proof than anyone in the coffee shop had expected to see. Omega Black clearance, she continued, is reserved for operations that could destabilize entire regions. If they were ever made public, the kind of missions that prevent wars rather than fighting them. The kind of work that saves millions of lives by ending a few dozen. The lead accuser was staring at his phone again, but this time he wasn't looking up military records. He was reading news articles about classified government programs, searching for any mention of the technology Jessica had demonstrated. "I can't find anything about this," he said weakly. "Of course you can't," Jessica replied. "If you could find information about Omega Black operations on the internet, they wouldn't be classified, would they?" She picked up her coffee and took another sip, grimacing again at the cold liquid. "The program I worked for," she said, "officially doesn't exist. The technology I use doesn't appear in any public research papers. The missions I completed aren't recorded in any database you can access." She gestured toward the people in the coffee shop who were still trying to photograph her tattoo with their phones. "Those pictures you're taking won't show you anything useful," she said. "The ink used in the tattoo is designed to be invisible to most cameras. What you're seeing with your naked eyes is actually just a portion of the complete design." Several people looked at their phone screens and confirmed that the tattoo appeared blurred and indistinct in their photos, despite being clearly visible in person. "The complete pattern," Jessica explained, "can only be seen using specialized equipment or under specific lighting conditions. It's another security measure designed to prevent unauthorized reproduction." The technology demonstration was having exactly the effect Jessica had intended. The lead accuser and his friends were no longer questioning whether she had served in the military. They were struggling to comprehend the level of classified operations she had been involved in. "Why are you showing us this?" the lead accuser asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "If it's so classified, why are you revealing it to random people in a coffee shop?" Jessica looked at him with an expression that mixed pity with profound exhaustion. "Because," she said slowly, "some secrets are too heavy to carry alone. Because I've spent 4 years being invisible, being doubted, being dismissed by people who think they understand military service based on movies and television shows." She gestured toward the crowd that had gathered around them. "Because maybe it's time for people to understand that the wars you read about in newspapers are just the tip of the iceberg. That there are men and women fighting battles that will never be acknowledged, preventing catastrophes that will never be reported, saving lives that will never know they were in danger." The confession hung in the air like incense, heavy with the weight of truths that were meant to remain hidden. Jessica had crossed a line, revealed secrets that were meant to die with her, broken protocols that existed for reasons of national security. "Aren't you afraid of getting in trouble?" someone asked from the crowd. Jessica laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "What are they going to do to me?" she asked. "Court-martial me? I'm already discharged." "Arrest me? For what defending my honor against people who accused me of stolen valor? Strip me of my benefits? They already did that when they classified my service records." She looked around the coffee shop one more time, taking in the faces of people who would never look at quiet women in military jackets the same way again. "The truth is," she said, "I'm already dead. Officially, Jessica Martinez died in a training accident 4 years ago. The woman standing here today is a ghost, a classified asset who was retired when her usefulness ended and her knowledge became a liability." The revelation hit the coffee shop like a physical blow. People were staring at Jessica with a mixture of awe and horror, trying to understand what it meant to be officially deceased while obviously still alive. "So when you accused me of stolen valor," she said, directing her words to the lead accuser, who had started this entire confrontation, "you weren't just questioning my military service. You were demanding proof of existence from someone who officially never existed in the first place." The mathematical precision of the irony was almost beautiful. The man who had appointed himself guardian of military authenticity had spent the morning trying to expose someone whose very existence was classified above his security clearance level. But Jessica wasn't finished. She had spent years carrying the burden of invisible heroism, of unacknowledged sacrifice, of being dismissed and doubted by people who had never faced the choices she had been forced to make. And now, finally, she was ready to tell them exactly what those choices had cost her. The silence in the coffee shop was broken by the sound of a chair scraping against the floor. An older man in the corner, who had been quietly observing the entire confrontation while reading a newspaper, slowly stood up and began walking toward Jessica. He was tall, perhaps in his 60s, with silver hair and the kind of posture that spoke of decades in uniform. His civilian clothes were well-tailored but understated, and he moved with the careful precision of someone whose body had endured significant trauma, but whose mind remained sharp. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Did you say Ghost 7? Jessica turned toward him, her entire demeanor shifting as she recognized something in his bearing that the other coffee shop patrons had missed. This wasn't another curious civilian or amateur stolen valor hunter. This was someone who understood exactly what those words meant. "Yes, sir," she replied, unconsciously straightening to something approaching attention. The man studied her face for a long moment, his eyes moving from her features to the partially visible tattoo on her shoulder, then back to her eyes with the intensity of someone conducting a formal inspection. "Colonel James Mitchell," he said, extending his hand, "retired. I was the operational commander for the Prometheus program from 2006 to 2011. The handshake that followed was firm, professional, and loaded with significance that escaped everyone else in the coffee shop. But Jessica understood immediately. Colonel Mitchell wasn't just a random veteran who happened to be having coffee. He was her former commanding officer, the man who had recruited her into the most classified program in American military history. "Sir," Jessica said, her voice taking on a formality that hadn't been present during her confrontation with the stolen valor hunters. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I live in the area now," Mitchell replied. "Retirement has its advantages. I was just having my morning coffee and reading the paper when I heard a commotion about stolen valor and classified operations." He looked around the coffee shop, taking in the faces of people who were still trying to process what they had witnessed. "I have to say," he continued, "I'm surprised to see you breaking operational security protocols. The Jessica Martinez I knew would never have revealed classified information to civilians, regardless of the provocation." The gentle reproof carried the weight of disappointment, and Jessica felt a familiar shame that she had hoped never to experience again. She had spent 4 years trying to rebuild her life, trying to find purpose outside the military structure that had defined her existence, trying to be someone other than Ghost 7. "Sir," she said quietly, "I was being accused of stolen valor. My service record is sealed, my benefits have been suspended, and I've been living as a ghost for 4 years. Sometimes the truth is the only weapon you have left." Mitchell nodded slowly, understanding the desperate circumstances that had driven her to reveal secrets that should have died with her. "The Prometheus program," he said, raising his voice slightly so that everyone in the coffee shop could hear, "was established in 2005 to handle threats that conventional military forces couldn't address. The operators were selected from the top 1% of Special Forces personnel and trained in techniques that pushed the boundaries of human capability." He gestured toward Jessica, and the entire coffee shop focused on her with renewed intensity. "Ghost 7 was the youngest operator ever recruited into the program," Mitchell continued. "She completed her first mission at the age of 23, infiltrating a terrorist cell that had been planning attacks on American soil for over 2 years. The lead accuser, who had been growing smaller and quieter with each revelation, managed to find his voice. "If this program was so classified," he said weakly, "why are you talking about it now?" Mitchell smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. It was the smile of someone who had spent decades dealing with politicians, bureaucrats, and armchair warriors who questioned decisions they would never be qualified to make. "Because," he said simply, "the program was officially terminated 3 years ago." Most of the classified restrictions have been lifted, though the operational details remain. Sealed. He turned back to Jessica, his expression growing more serious. What I can tell you, he said, is that Ghost 7 completed 17 missions over a period of 6 years. Each mission was designed to prevent large-scale terrorist attacks, stop the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, or eliminate threats to American national security that couldn't be handled through conventional diplomatic or military channels. The coffee shop had become a lecture hall, with Mitchell serving as professor and Jessica as his unwilling case study. But the colonel wasn't finished with his impromptu briefing. The mission parameters for Prometheus operators, he continued, required them to work alone, often for months at a time, in hostile territory with no backup and no possibility of extraction if things went wrong. He paused, letting the weight of that statement settle over his audience. They were required to speak multiple languages, master various forms of combat, understand complex geopolitical situations, and make life or death decisions with incomplete information and under extreme pressure. Jessica shifted uncomfortably. Under the scrutiny of 30-odd coffee shop patrons who were hanging on every word. She had never wanted to be the subject of a case study, had never asked for recognition or acknowledgement of her service. Ghost 7's final mission, Mitchell said, his voice taking on a more somber tone, involved preventing the detonation of a radiological weapon in a major American city. The operation required her to maintain deep cover for 8 months, infiltrating an organization that would have killed her instantly if her true identity had been discovered. The silence in the coffee shop was profound. Even the espresso machine had stopped making noise, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. The mission was successful, Mitchell continued. The weapon was secured, the terrorist cell was eliminated, and approximately 2 million American civilians never knew how close they came to experiencing a radiological disaster. He looked directly at the lead accuser, who was staring at Jessica with an expression of growing horror and shame. The political fallout from the operation, Mitchell said, required the existence of the Prometheus program to be officially denied. All records were classified above top secret. All operators were discharged with sealed files, and the program itself was disbanded. Jessica felt the familiar weight of injustice settling on her shoulders. She had saved millions of lives and been rewarded with official non-existence, bureaucratic exile, and 4 years of being questioned and doubted by people who had never risked anything more dangerous than a paper cut. The operators, Mitchell continued, were told that their service would never be acknowledged, their achievements would never be recognized, and their sacrifices would remain hidden for the sake of national security. He gestured toward Jessica again, his voice gaining intensity. They were promised that their benefits would be protected, that their medical care would be provided, and that their transition to civilian life would be supported by the same government. They had served with such distinction. The implication hung in the air like an indictment. Mitchell was revealing, in careful language that skirted classified details, that the government had broken its promises to the Prometheus operators. What actually happened, he said, his voice growing harder, was that most of the operators found their benefits suspended, their medical care denied, and their service records sealed so tightly that they couldn't even prove they had served in the military. Several people in the coffee shop were openly crying now, understanding that they were witnessing the exposure of a massive governmental betrayal. Jessica stood at the center of it all, feeling simultaneously vindicated and humiliated by the public airing of her grievances. Ghost 7, Mitchell said, turning to face her directly, was one of the most effective operators in the history of the program. Her mission success rate was 100%. Her casualty record was 0, and her psychological evaluations consistently rated her as the most stable and reliable operative in the program. He paused, and when he continued, his voice carried the weight of personal regret. She was also the operator who suffered the most severe retaliation when the program was terminated. Her benefits were not just suspended, they were retroactively revoked. Her medical records were sealed so completely that civilian doctors couldn't access them to provide appropriate care. Her discharge paperwork was classified at a level that made it impossible for her to prove her military service to potential employers. The lead accuser was no longer standing. He had sunk into a nearby chair, his face pale with the realization of what he had done. He had spent the morning attacking someone who had literally saved his life and the lives of everyone. He knew someone whose sacrifice had been rewarded with systematic governmental abandonment. "Colonel," Jessica said quietly, "you don't need to do this." "Yes," Mitchell replied firmly, "I do. Because what happened to you and the other Prometheus operators is a stain on the honor of every person who has ever worn the uniform of the United States military." He turned to address the coffee shop patrons directly. "When we ask people to serve their country," he said, "we make promises. We promise that their service will be honored, their sacrifices will be remembered, and their needs will be met when they return home." His voice grew louder, taking on the cadence of someone delivering a speech that had been building inside him for years. "But sometimes," he continued, "political convenience becomes more important than honor. Sometimes bureaucratic expediency trumps moral obligation. Sometimes the people who serve most faithfully are the ones who are most thoroughly betrayed." Jessica felt tears building in her eyes, not from self-pity but from the unexpected relief of finally having someone with authority acknowledge what had been done to her and her fellow operators. "The woman standing here today," Mitchell said, gesturing toward Jessica, "prevented a terrorist attack that would have killed more Americans than died on September 11th. She sacrificed her identity, her future, and her peace of mind to protect a nation that then pretended she never existed." The weight of that truth settled over the coffee shop like a heavy blanket. People were looking at Jessica not with curiosity or skepticism, but with the kind of reverence usually reserved for monuments and memorials. "So when you see someone like Ghost 7, Mitchell said, directing his words toward the lead accuser, and your first instinct is to question their service, to demand proof of their sacrifice, to assume they're lying about their contributions to your safety, remember that some heroes are invisible by design, not by choice." The colonel reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, which he handed to Jessica. "My contact information," he said. "I've been working with a legal team that specializes in veterans' rights cases. We've been trying to locate former Prometheus operators to help them get the benefits and recognition they deserve." Jessica took the card with shaking hands. After 4 years of fighting the bureaucracy alone, the prospect of having allies with resources and connections was almost overwhelming. "There are others?" she asked. 7 confirmed survivors," Mitchell replied. 3 others are still missing. We've been hoping that publicity like this might help them come forward." He looked around the coffee shop one more time, taking in the faces of people who had just received an education in the hidden costs of freedom. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "you've just met a genuine American hero. Not the kind you see in movies or read about in books, but the real thing. Someone who walked into hell and came back with the devil's plans. Someone who prevented disasters you'll never hear about. Someone who saved lives that will never know they were in danger." The recognition Jessica had never sought, the acknowledgement she had never expected, and the vindication she had stopped hoping for were finally being offered by the one person whose opinion had always mattered most. But as she looked around the coffee shop at the faces of people who were seeing her completely differently than they had an hour earlier, Jessica realized that recognition, while gratifying, couldn't undo 4 years of invisibility and abandonment. 3 months after the coffee shop confrontation that changed everything, Jessica Martinez sat in a congressional hearing room watching C-SPAN. Cameras capture her testimony for the permanent record. The mahogany-paneled chamber was filled with representatives, senators, military officials, and journalists who had come to hear about the systematic abandonment of America's most classified warriors. The lead accuser from the coffee shop, whose name she had learned was David Brennan, sat in the public gallery. He had become an unlikely ally, using his social media platform to advocate for veterans' rights and warn against the dangers of amateur stolen valor investigations. The viral video of their confrontation had sparked a national conversation about how society treats its hidden heroes. "Ms. Martinez," the committee chairman said, leaning into his microphone, "can you tell us in your own words what it means to serve your country in complete anonymity?" Jessica looked up at the gallery where Colonel Mitchell sat with 6 other former Prometheus operators they had managed to locate. Each had their own story of governmental betrayal, bureaucratic abandonment, and civilian dismissal. But they were together now, no longer invisible, no longer alone. "Senator," Jessica began, her voice steady and clear, "it means accepting that your greatest achievements will be your most closely guarded secrets. It means understanding that saving lives and preventing catastrophes will never appear on your resume or in your obituary." She paused, gathering her thoughts while cameras recorded every word for posterity. "But it also means something else," she continued. "It means recognizing that service isn't about recognition. It's about doing what's right when no one is watching, when no one will thank you, when no one will even know that you were there." Hearing room was silent except for the soft clicking of cameras and the scratch of reporters' pens on paper. The Prometheus program taught us that the most important missions are often the ones that officially never happened. We learned to find satisfaction not in medals or commendations, but in the knowledge that families were sleeping safely because of work we could never discuss. A senator from Texas leaned forward in his chair. "Ms. Martinez, what would you say to other veterans who might be struggling with similar situations? Veterans whose service can't be easily proven or documented." Jessica looked directly into the C-SPAN camera, knowing that her words would reach thousands of veterans who had felt invisible, dismissed, or forgotten. "I would tell them that their service matters, regardless of whether other people believe it or acknowledge it. I would tell them that some of the most important work in this country is done by people whose names will never be known, whose faces will never be on monuments, whose stories will never be told." She stood up from the witness table, her movement causing a stir in the hearing room. "But I would also tell them that they don't have to carry their burdens alone anymore. That there are people fighting to make sure their sacrifices are recognized and their needs are met. That the system that abandoned them can be changed, but only if they're willing to step out of the shadows and demand the respect they've earned." The committee chairman nodded approvingly. "Ms. Martinez, this committee has reviewed the classified details of your service record, and I want to state for the public record that your contributions to American national security have been extraordinary. By any measure." He held up a thick folder marked with classification stamps. "While we cannot discuss the specifics of your missions, I can tell you that the operations you completed prevented multiple terrorist attacks, saved countless American lives, and protected our national interests in ways that most citizens will never fully understand." Jessica felt a wave of emotion that she hadn't experienced since her early days in the military. Official recognition, public acknowledgement, governmental validation of everything she had sacrificed and endured. "Furthermore," the chairman continued, "this committee is recommending immediate restoration of benefits for all Prometheus program veterans, establishment of a classified veteran support division within the VA, and creation of new protocols to ensure that future covert operators receive the care and recognition they deserve." The hearing room erupted in applause, but Jessica barely heard it. She was thinking about Sarah Chun, the helicopter pilot whose memory had started this entire journey. She was thinking about the other Prometheus operators who hadn't survived. Their missions or their abandonment She was thinking about all the quiet heroes who served without recognition and died without acknowledgement. After the hearing, Jessica walked out of the Capitol building into the bright Washington sunshine. David Brennan was waiting for her on the steps, along with a small crowd of reporters and veteran advocates. "Ms. Martinez," a journalist called out, "what's next for you? Will you continue working as an advocate for classified veterans?" Jessica looked out at the crowd, then up at the dome of the Capitol, where lawmakers were beginning to address the systemic problems that had left so many veterans invisible and forgotten. "What's next," she said, "is making sure that no veteran ever has to choose between their oath of secrecy and their need for recognition. What's next is building a system that honors service regardless of whether that service can be publicly documented." She paused, thinking about the coffee shop where this journey had begun, about the assumptions people made about quiet women in faded military jackets, about the hidden heroes walking among us every day. "But most importantly," she continued, "what's next is remembering that heroism comes in many forms. It's not always loud or visible or dramatic. Sometimes it's as quiet as a woman sitting alone in a coffee shop, carrying the weight of secrets that saved millions of lives." David Brennan stepped forward, his expression serious but hopeful. "Jessica," he said, "I want to apologize again for what I put you through. But I also want to thank you, because you taught me that my assumptions about veterans and service were dangerously wrong." Jessica looked at him with something approaching forgiveness. His attack had been born of ignorance rather than malice, and his subsequent advocacy had helped bring attention to issues that might otherwise have remained hidden. "David," she said, "you weren't the first person to question my service, and you won't be the last. But maybe, because of what happened between us, other veterans won't have to prove their worth to strangers in coffee shops." As the crowd began to disperse, Colonel Mitchell approached Jessica with a small box in his hands. "I have something for you," he said, opening the box to reveal a medal that Jessica had never seen before. "The Congressional Medal for Classified Service," he explained. "It was created specifically for veterans whose achievements can't be publicly documented. You're the first person to receive it." Jessica stared at the medal, understanding that while recognition was gratifying, the real victory was systemic. Change that would help other veterans in similar situations. "Sir," she said, "this belongs to all of us. Every Prometheus operator, every classified veteran, every quiet hero who served without recognition." Mitchell smiled, the expression of a commander who was proud of what his former operator had become. "Then, wear it for all of them," he said. 6 months later, Jessica opened the Veterans Advocacy Center that she had established with funding from the Congressional Appropriation for Classified Veteran Services. The center occupied a converted warehouse in a quiet part of town, its unremarkable exterior hiding the revolutionary work being done inside. The walls were lined with photographs of veterans whose service had been classified, forgotten, or denied. Sarah Chun's picture held a place of honor near the entrance, a reminder that some heroes die before their stories can be told. Jessica's own photograph was nowhere to be seen. Despite the public recognition and official acknowledgement, she remained most comfortable in the background, helping other veterans navigate the complex process of proving unprovable service and accessing benefits that had been denied. On quiet afternoons when the center was empty and the phones weren't ringing, Jessica would sometimes stand in front of the memorial wall and think about the coffee shop confrontation that had changed everything. She thought about the assumptions people made, the courage required to challenge those assumptions, and the hidden strength that existed in places where no one thought to look. The truth, she had learned, was that heroes weren't created by recognition or validation or public acclaim. Heroes were created by choices made in moments when no one was watching, by sacrifices offered without expectation of reward, by service rendered in complete anonymity. But recognition, when it finally came, served a purpose beyond personal vindication. It reminded society that heroism lived in unexpected places, that strength came in forms that defied stereotypes, and that the most important work was often done by the most invisible people. The quiet woman in the coffee shop had become a voice for the voiceless, an advocate for the invisible, and a reminder that legends weren't just stories from the past. They were walking among us every day, serving with honor regardless of whether anyone was paying attention. 1 year after the congressional hearing, Jessica received an unexpected visitor at the Veterans Advocacy Center. A young woman in her early 20s knocked on the door during evening hours when the building was supposed to be closed. She wore civilian clothes but carried herself with the rigid posture of active military personnel. "Ms. Martinez?" The woman asked hesitantly. "My name is Lieutenant Angela Foster. I'm with Army Intelligence, and I've been following your story." Jessica invited her inside, recognizing the same haunted expression she had seen in mirrors for years. Lieutenant Foster was struggling with something that went beyond typical military stress. "I've been assigned to operations that don't officially exist," Foster began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Psychological warfare, information manipulation, cyber operations against foreign governments. The kind of work that keeps me awake at night, wondering if I'm serving my country or destroying my soul." Jessica poured 2 cups of coffee and settled into her desk chair, understanding that this conversation represented the future of classified military service. New technologies were creating new forms of invisible warfare, and young soldiers were facing moral complexities that previous generations couldn't have imagined. "The worst part," Foster continued, "is that I can't talk to anyone about what I do. My family thinks I'm a desk clerk processing paperwork. My friends think I'm boring, because I can never discuss my work. And my commanding officers act like the psychological impact of our operations is just part of the job." Jessica recognized the isolation, the burden of carrying secrets that shaped your identity while being unable to share them with anyone who might understand. But Foster's situation was different. She was still on active duty, still bound by oaths and classifications that Jessica had been released from through public disclosure. "Have you considered seeking counseling through military channels?" Jessica asked. Foster laughed bitterly. "The military psychiatrists are cleared to know about conventional combat operations, but most of them don't have the security clearance to discuss what I actually do. How do you explain PTSD from missions that officially never happened to a therapist who isn't allowed to know those missions exist?" The question highlighted a fundamental flaw in how the military addressed mental health for classified personnel. Jessica made a note to discuss this issue with Colonel Mitchell and the other Prometheus veterans who were working on policy reforms. "There are others like you," Jessica said carefully. "Active duty personnel who are struggling with the psychological impact of classified operations. We're working to establish support networks that can provide help without compromising operational security." Foster's eyes brightened with something approaching hope. "Really? Because I was starting to think I was going crazy. The cognitive dissonance of maintaining a false identity while conducting operations that could affect global politics, it's eating me alive." Jessica opened a filing cabinet and pulled out a folder containing contact information for therapists who held appropriate security clearances, support groups for active duty personnel involved in classified operations, and legal resources for soldiers who were concerned about the legality or morality of their assignments. "The system is slowly changing," Jessica explained, handing Foster the information. "But change takes time, and in the meantime, people like you need support that doesn't compromise national security or operational effectiveness." As Foster prepared to leave, she turned back to Jessica with a question that cut to the heart of everything. "Ms. Martinez, do you ever regret serving in classified operations? Do you ever wish you had chosen a different path, something that would have allowed you to live a normal life?" Jessica considered the question carefully, thinking about all the paths not taken, All the normal experiences she had sacrificed for missions that most people would never know about. "I regret the cost," she said finally. "I regret that serving my country required me to become invisible, that protecting American lives meant abandoning my own identity, that preventing disasters meant accepting isolation and abandonment." She paused, looking around the advocacy center. That had become her life's work. "But I don't regret the service itself," she continued. "Because somewhere in America tonight, families are sleeping safely because of operations like ours. Children are growing up in a world that's more secure, because people like us chose to bear burdens that others couldn't carry." Foster nodded, understanding, passing between two warriors who had fought very different but equally invisible wars. "The question isn't whether the sacrifice is worth it," Jessica added. "The question is whether society will do better by the next generation of classified veterans, whether the system will evolve to support people like you before the isolation and abandonment destroy them." After Foster left, Jessica walked through the advocacy center, turning off lights and checking that the security systems were armed. The building was quiet, but she could feel the presence of all the veterans who had found help here, all the stories that had been shared, all the lives that had been rebuilt. The memorial wall had grown over the months, with photographs in brief, biographies of classified veterans who had served in operations ranging from Cold War intelligence gathering to modern cyber warfare. Each face represented a person who had chosen service over recognition, duty over personal comfort, national security over individual acknowledgement. At the center of the wall, Sarah Chun's photograph still held its place of honor, but it was no longer alone. Surrounding it were images of Prometheus operators, intelligence analysts, cyber warriors, and covert operatives who had emerged from the shadows to help build a better system for those who would follow. Jessica's own story had become part of something larger, a movement to ensure that invisible service didn't mean invisible suffering, that classified operations didn't require abandoning the people who conducted them, that national security could coexist with basic human dignity. The coffee shop confrontation that had started this journey seemed like a lifetime ago, but its lessons remained relevant. Society's assumptions about heroism, strength, and service needed constant challenging. The most important work was often done by the most unlikely people, and the greatest courage was sometimes displayed in the quietest moments. As Jessica locked the building and walked to her car, she thought about all the coffee shops across America where quiet conversations were taking place between people whose service couldn't be publicly acknowledged. Veterans sharing strategies for maintaining cover stories, active duty personnel struggling with moral complexities, family members trying to understand loved ones whose work remained mysteriously vague. The invisible war for recognition, support, and dignity was being fought one conversation at a time, one advocacy case at a time, one small victory at a time. It wasn't the dramatic revelation of classified tattoos or the public vindication of congressional hearings, but it was the real work of building a society that truly supported all of its veterans. And sometimes, when circumstances demanded it, when injustice could no longer be tolerated, when the truth was more important than the secrets that protected it, those legends stepped out of the shadows and reminded the world what real heroism looked like. In coffee shops and congressional hearing rooms, in quiet conversations and public testimonies, in moments both small and significant, they proved that honor never truly dies. It just waits patiently for the right moment to reveal itself to those who have forgotten what sacrifice really means. The woman who had once been Ghost 7 drove home through empty streets, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new veterans seeking help, new opportunities to bridge the gap between classified service and public recognition. Her tattoos remained hidden beneath professional clothing, but their meaning had transcended personal identification to become symbols of a broader truth about the hidden cost of freedom and the quiet courage of those who pay for it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload. From us